Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1992 action-adventure fantasy horror hybrid, Army of Darkness. Now, Army of Darkness is a really good movie. It's a classic in its own right, but it's not my favorite Evil Dead film. I know it is for a lot of fans of the franchise and of film in general, and I have no problem with that. I can totally understand why. I mean, the movie has a lot going for it. It's got a really quick pace. It's riotously entertaining. It's genuinely exciting and unique in numerous different ways. Bruce Campbell owns the film as Ash in this movie. And it is ultimately a really different kind of Evil Dead movie. Much like Evil Dead 2 was very different than Evil Dead, despite the fact that there were a lot of similarities when it comes to the film's plot. This is the first time you see an Evil Dead film where things are completely different in terms of the plot line. Not necessarily in terms of the tone, but in terms of the plot line. And I just think it's a really clever and fun idea to have Ash in medieval times battling Deadites. And this film really does do a wonderful job showcasing that. But for me personally, I like the first two films better because they have a little bit more of an edge to them, and there's a few other elements that I feel that are stronger in those films than in Army of Darkness. But Army of Darkness is still a really good movie, and one of my favorites from this particular genre of hybrids of these kind of genres of film. It's directed by Sam Raimi, who returns to the director's chair and once again showcases his immense talent when it comes to working behind the camera and dealing with films like this that require controlled chaos. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but it really is something that still remains after all these years. Sam Raimi, in his prime, was the king of controlled chaos. He had these films with very chaotic storylines and energy and zaniness and just off the wall craziness, and these were all things that really required a director who was able to control the chaos in a way and weaponize it and make it so it's something that is a boon to the film instead of something that holds it back. And that's a testament to Sam's talent as a director. Once again, you have the same energy with the pans and the zooms and the camera work, and it also showcases how talented Sam had gotten at shooting action sequences. He had a little bit of experience with that with Darkman in years prior, and with Army of Darkness, he really went all out with some really epic, swashbuckling sword fights in the climax and big epic battles between armies and skeleton armies, and he really did give this film his all. I think it's honestly the last film that he directed that had this kind of authentic energy that he did. Because after this, he did some other movies and did a good job with them in terms of the directing, but nothing on the same level as Army of Darkness. This, in a lot of ways, to me, is kind of Sam's swan song. I understand he's done other stuff after this, but I just didn't really feel that anything that he did after this, including the Spider-Man films, or any of the dramas that he did, or Drag Me to Hell, or even the pilot for Ash vs. Evil Dead, which he did a good job on, I still never felt that they really captured the same magic that he had with Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2, and even something like Darkman. I feel that this was the last time we saw the Sam Raimi that really broke new ground when it comes to cinema, when it comes to directing, especially in this genre. Um, and it was a great way to go out. Uh, where the film falters for me is with its screenplay. Now, the concept is really great and grand and full of some absolutely memorable lines of dialogue and sequences, a lot of creativity, a lot of ingenuity and imagination, which is really what makes this franchise so good, is because of how creative it is. Um, and that's still in place here. But I felt that the screenplay by Sam Raimi and Ivan Raimi, it's a little stale. And what I mean by that is when it comes to the comedy, when it comes to the humor, a lot of it felt like it was more of the same that you saw in Evil Dead 2. They're just copying some of the same beats, and at times it was genuinely funny to me. But at other times, it wasn't as funny as it was in Evil Dead 2. It wasn't as irreverent. It wasn't as unpredictable. It was just one of those things where it just felt like they were kind of going down the same well, and the more times they tapped that well in this film, the less effective the comedy was. Also, the screenplay honestly lacks a real edge and some legitimate horror to it. This film is very tame for an Evil Dead movie. I can see why this became a staple on cable and for a lot of young teenagers, because this really does not have the same edge and the same intensity as the first two Evil Dead films. It's very tame in that regard. It has about the same amount of intensity and edge as Big Trouble in Little China, and I love Big Trouble in Little China. It's honestly one of my favorite films. I would say even like it more than Army of Darkness. But Big Trouble in Little China is not really intended to have, an edge. It's not part of a franchise that was well known for having that kind of edge to it. And Evil Dead 2 softened things up a little bit, had some more goofy elements. It was, went more off the wall. It had physical comedy. It was more of a horror comedy mix than a straight up horror film like Evil Dead. And that still worked because there was still that intensity. There was still that legitimate horror. Army of Darkness is almost completely devoid of that. There's nothing about it that's scary. There's nothing about it that makes you really think about how genuinely terrifying some of this stuff is. There's really nothing about it that even comes close to genuine horror. And I feel that definitely does hold this film back. I think it would have been interesting to have seen Sam still involved with the writing process and the story and dialogue and stuff like that, and maybe Ivan as well, but with a different writer also brought into the fold who could lend some new approaches to the Evil Dead franchise. I think that would have been really interesting to have seen somebody else work on it and kind of see what they can do with it versus just the same people. And I understand why you have the same people because, a lot of ways, the Evil Dead franchise is Sam's baby, and I get it. But I just think it would have been interesting to have seen another voice in the writer's room. And also, maybe another writer would have helped this film in terms of its supporting cast. Army of Darkness has the weakest supporting cast in the entire franchise. Except for, I'm not counting the Evil Dead remake because that's a separate thing. But if I was, then they'd be kind of on the same level. Or this would just be a little bit better. But if we're just talking about the Evil Dead trilogy with Ash, yeah, this is the weakest supporting cast out of the entire trilogy. I'm not saying the supporting casts in the first two were legendary or amazing, but they were serviceable and they were strong enough, and there were enough characters in the supporting cast that made you genuinely care about what happens to them. I never really felt that way about the supporting cast in Army of Darkness. I feel the princess character of Sheila is incredibly weak. The way that she was written, the romance was very rushed. It didn't feel natural. And I didn't really feel that the actress Embeth Davidtz really had any chemistry with Bruce Campbell either. So that didn't do this particular characterization any favors. And then on top of that, you have this Lord Arthur character, which I honestly thought was awful. I don't like this character. He's not likable. He's not interesting. And Marcus Gilbert, may be a really nice guy, but I didn't feel he delivered that great of a performance. It was very flat. Every time he was on the screen with Bruce Campbell, he was blown entirely off of it. Ian Abercrombie as the wise man, he was funny, but he was not in the movie that much, and he really didn't have that big of a role. And then you had Richard Grove as Duke Henry the Red. Like, he was the best one out of the supporting cast, the one that I kind of cared about the most because he at least had a personality. But he wasn't in it that much either. And he didn't really have a whole lot to do, at least in the theatrical cut. And you have really talented actors in this. Other than Bruce Campbell, I mean, for example, Patricia Tallman plays a possessed witch in this. Patricia Tallman already established how talented of an actress she was and how she was a legitimately good lead in the Night of the Living Dead remake, which is why I don't know why she wasn't the one that was cast as Sheila. I think I would have been much stronger if she was the one that was Sheila instead of Embeth Davidtz. And that's just me personally, because I like Patricia Tallman and I think she's just a better actress. Feels like she's wasted in this role, although she does a good job with it. Still feels like it's a waste. Even Angela Featherstone, who just plays the S-Smart girl in the final sequence of this movie, she might have been better. I never really got into Embeth Davidtz. Nothing against her. I just never really felt that she was really that dynamic, and I just felt that the scenes with her and Bruce Campbell, and there was supposed to be this whole thing about Ash and Sheila and how, the romance, and you're supposed to really feel for Ash because, his decisions and all this stuff led to her getting possessed and blah, 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 blah. And, I never really felt that much for this romance being in danger or this relationship being in trouble, because I never really felt it was that strong to begin with. Yeah, I mean, that's really a serious problem with this movie. I mean, the only other character in the cast other than Duke the Red that I cared about or liked watching was Evil Ash, or just the other versions of Ash that appear throughout the movie. And that's just more of Bruce Campbell, and that's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing, because Bruce Campbell is an immensely talented actor and physical comedian, and he's really absolutely giving it his all here and delivering definitely one of his best performances. He's also in the best physical shape of his life, and that's very evident, and that enables him to really pull off a lot of the more physical stuff in the film, and genuinely be a believable badass. But it's still one of those movies where I can't help but feel that it's lacking another gear. It's lacking something that really could have taken it to a whole other level. Also, the climax, as fun as it is to see Sam's tribute to Ray Harryhausen with the Skeleton Army, at times it gets a little tedious because it's more of the same. It's just, okay, now there's just more skeletons getting blown up. Okay. And Sam and company do their best to try to make it unique and original each and every time. And sometimes they succeed, but other times they fail. And you can literally just see skeleton dummies just standing there while they're getting blown up. So, I mean, there's a really clever bit with the Oldsmobile where they soup it up and Ash is driving it around and chopping skeletons to pieces, and it's a really rousing and fun sequence. But that sequence doesn't last very long, and then you're just left with more of the same skeletons getting blown up or stabbed or whatever in various different ways, and it just gets a little repetitive after a while. I think that's just due to the nature of the climax and the setup that they had for it. It's not necessarily anything that I feel that Sam did wrong. It's just kind of how things are with the path that they decided to take. But yeah, despite my issues with it, it's like I said, it's still an immensely enjoyable and entertaining movie, in large part because of Bruce Campbell and his just presence and just how much fun he's having with the role. So therefore, you're having a blast watching him play the role of Ash in this movie. It's also a really well shot film, not only from a directorial standpoint, but also when it comes to the cinematography by Bill Pope, who comes back and reunites with Sam after his work in Darkman, and once again creates a very visually impressive film when it comes to a cinematography perspective. It's excellently edited by Bob Murawski and R.O.C. Sandstorm. It really does have this energy to it, which is what really makes the Evil Dead franchise stand out from other films like it. It's just this really high octane energy that in a lot of ways is kind of like, the camera's on crack, but it really does work though, because it really injects energy into the overall film and really helps it. And the budget is one of the biggest budgets. I think Darkman actually had more money, but this is still a pretty fairly big budget production for Sam compared to what he had to work with Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. And you got the ultimate team up of K&B and Tony Gardner working together to do the effects for this film. And it really does feature some really amazing and spectacular special effects, makeup, and visual effects work. Really top-notch stuff. And that is another reason why I really like the film, is just to see it as a pure visual spectacle when it comes to the effects. The score by Joseph Loduca I also thought was really good. I would say it's actually my favorite of his when it comes to the three films that he scored. Danny Elfman also comes in and does a little piece for the film for the Skeleton Army, and it's a real treat as always. And there are like 3 different versions of the movie. I haven't watched all 3 of them in a long time. I prefer the theatrical cut. It has better pacing. It has the better ending. There are better lines that are missing in certain cuts of the film. Like the whole bit with one of the copies of Ash antagonizing Ash and going, getting little dishes, and then Ash shoots him with the shotgun. He's like, good, bad, I'm the guy with the gun. Like that was awesome. That's a badass line of dialogue. That's not in every cut of this film. And I honestly hate the original ending. I know a lot of people love this ending, including Sam Raimi, and I think even Bruce Campbell is a big fan of it. I hate the ending. It completely, it's unnecessary. I get it. Oh, Ash, she's just a tortured soul, and he's always doomed to, never getting the girl and never winning in the end. But I don't like that. Ash in this film becomes a character that is so iconic with his line delivery and with just the way he carries himself. One of the most iconic cinematic heroes is Ash in this movie, and it just feels like a massive letdown to have him not make it back and to not have some bit of happiness after the hell that he's went throughout this trilogy. He's earned it. So I I absolutely disagree with Sam and everyone else who thinks that the theatrical ending is the weaker ending. I mean, it has a really great action sequence in the S Mart with another Deadite and Ash kicking ass with a shotgun, and some trampoline fun, and another really great moment when it comes to lines of dialogue. Hail to the king, baby. Yeah, it's just a really fun sequence, and I feel the film really benefited from that ending. I don't think I would like Army of Darkness that as much as I do, even with the problems that I do have with it, if it had the original ending. But that's just how I feel about Army of Darkness. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about the movie. It's one of those films that still holds up really well when it comes to the effects, when it comes to the humor, even though at times it got a little stale for me. I think it's because I'm not really the biggest fan of Three Stooges, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff in this. But I still get a chuckle and a lot of laughs from this. And the creativity is still there. I mean, Ash creates his own metal arm out of like knight armor and other things, and then soups up the Oldsmobile and turns it into a Deathmobile to like fuck up a bunch of skeletons, and the whole stuff with the different versions of Ash, including evil Ash that comes out literally from his shoulders, and just the whole premise and the whole setting and the concept of the film taking place in medieval times, and dealing with a little bit of the horror there, and so on and so forth. I just wish there was more horror and definitely more gore, because I cannot believe that this got an NC-17 with its original cut. Even if you watch like other versions of this movie, they're still not very gory and they're still not very bloody. So I don't know what the fuck the MPAA was looking at when they gave the original cut an NC-17. There's a little bit of blood here. There's some severed limbs, but it's one of those movies where you could easily cut out just a few scenes and it could be PG-13. And I think that's kind of a problem. That's one of the problems I have with the movie. I feel that it needed more. It needed more gore, more blood, more carnage, to put it on the same level as the first two films. Without it, it does. It just has a more tame feel to it, and I think that adds to the rewatchability of the movie, but it also detracts from the film because it makes it so it doesn't have as much impact as it could. But that being said, despite my issues, which I've listed and talked about numerous times at this point, I still really like the film. It's just a really enjoyable, fun romp, and it's one of Bruce Campbell's finest roles and finest hours, and he really is what makes this film work. It's like Big Trouble in Little China. If you don't have Kurt Russell and his performance, it's somebody else playing that role of Jack Burton, that movie wouldn't be as good. And the same thing applies with Army of Darkness. This is Bruce Campbell's film. This is his particular project and his moment to shine, and he shines as bright as the sun in this movie. Just really a dynamic and infinitely memorable performance by Bruce Campbell, and as a result, it's a legitimately good movie in its own right. Yeah, I got nothing else to say about Army of Darkness except thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see ya.